So, Mr. Mathews, would you like to tell us what you think of the current situation?
Well, starting in 2009, shortly after the financial meltdown and the banking crisis, we've been led on a wrong path. The incorrect analysis took place. There was a denial of the depth of the portfolio loan losses in the banks, and it's been seriously wrong the way that analysts who had measured the situation correctly, the losses correctly, were completely put down, sidelined, and actually told that they were wrong. That there was only one answer.
And unpatriotic as well.
Absolutely, but it was a matter of fact. It was quite easy actually when professionally one sat down, gathered together the audited balance sheets of the 6 Irish institutions, of which 5 did this disastrous property lending, and to drill down through their portfolios and determine very early in 2009, certainly by midsummer, that the loan losses were far higher than the government were and the department, the Minister for Finance, were pretending. That's the word. It was apparent as early as the end of September 2009 that loan losses would be not less than 40 billion, not the 23 billion that the government insisted would be the figure in the NAMA legislation. NAMA was introduced as a concept in April 2009, along with the supplementary budget. In July 2009, the NAMA bill was brought forward, and correctly and rightly, the Oireachtas, that's the TDs and the Senate, insisted that the NAMA framework, a financial framework, would have to be brought forward before the Oireachtas would allow the enactment or the statutory construction of the NAMA project, because otherwise it would be like statutorily creating an open check for the citizens of Ireland. So Mr. Lenihan came out on the 16th of September 2009 and announced that 77 billion of loans across 5 banks would be purchased for approximately 54 billion by NAMA, and that 23 billion was the amount, the sum total of the losses across those 5 banks. That's where it was fundamentally wrong, and that's where, in my professional opinion, and that of other people too, who are independent analysts and commentators, absolutely independent. But I have the experience to measure these things. I'm a chartered accountant by background and profession. I hold an MBA. I worked in charge of property lending at ICC Bank for 20 years, and I've been consulting independently, including abroad, for 10 years subsequently. So, I'm in a position from experience, plus I have had the direct experience of doing loan workouts, reconstructions and recoveries in the 1980s, when there was actually a property sector setback and loan losses in the 1980s. So there are very few people actually with much experience in loan workouts and recoveries.
So where do you think that Mr. Cowan is spending his 800,000 on advisors?
Well, I think it's been most disappointing that 32 million actually has been spent on about 5 firms in the period since the guarantee was brought in September 2008. In the first instance, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, did a report which was across the banks to look at the loan portfolios and to do, as it were, the groundwork for the preliminary listing of those 77 billion of loans. Then there was, prior to that, there was the Merrill Lynch's advices, and where Merrill Lynch was very disappointing was that they were engaged by our government on the 24th of September 2009, and on the 14th of 2008, and on the 14th of September 2008, 10 days before they got that engagement or assignment from our government, their own company, Merrill Lynch, actually had gone bust in America, and Bank of America did a forced rescue at the behest of the US government to take them over and save them from the actual consequences of a complete liquidation. Now, what was less than honest about their some of the papers that they produced in giving a menu of 6 different options facing our government in that crisis situation was that in a memorandum to our NTMA, National Treasury Management Agency, they produced on a sheet of paper part of that memorandum what they called the background context in serious large financial failures that had taken place in the period running up to that week and including that week. And it it listed all the well-known cases across the various countries, like Fannie and Freddie in the United States, Northern Rock in Britain, Fortis, Washington Mutual, and so on. But actually, amazingly and pointedly, they left out completely their own companies forced rescue by Bank of America 10 days earlier, which, that's like airbrushing out a very relevant factor. And yet they got 7.8 million in fees for the advices, which were non-directional advices and, could have been provided by independent people, maybe without brand names, but with honesty, integrity and non-compromise positions here at home. So it's been a very disappointing outcome in all the professional advices received and for the fee levels that they've been paid. It is hugely disappointing. I'd come back to this thing though about how NAMA came into being. It was the concept introduced, as I said, in April 2009 with the supplementary budget. It was brought about into a bill, a NAMA bill, in July 2009. Then the Oireachtas insisted on a framework, a financial framework, a scale, the figures that they wanted to know so there wouldn't be an open check, and that was produced on the 16th of September. And then as the Lisbon Treaty referendum got into high gear and people didn't even address mentally or intellectually with rigour what NAMA entailed, they listened to the propaganda PR, which is most disappointing, and they allowed themselves to be led by the nose on this false framework because, as I said, 23 billion was never a truthful estimate of the loan losses embedded in the banks. It was always going to be at that stage and can be shown to be and should have been known and was capable of being known. So in fact, I told Mr. Lennon on the 6th of November before the legislation was passed that the loan losses were every day could be measured at 40 billion, not a penny less or a cent less.
So he knowingly
yes,
misappropriated
there's an
the
argument,
figures.
there's a very fundamentally sound argument that it could be argued that it has been brought forward on the basis of misleading information, a fraud. And I'm saying that word carefully.
Yes.
It's not the first time I've said it. I said it in the Oireachtas at a joint Finance and Public Service Committee meeting in May. I was told in May the 5th, I outlined that the capital recapitalisation requirements of AIB and Bank of Ireland could be shown to be, very easily shown to be, not less than 10 billion and 6.5 billion respectively. And that presentation was diminished and derided by some of the members of that committee, Fianna Fáil government members, as being, Mr. Mathews, are you saying that the governor of the central bank and the financial regulator are incorrect or wrong with their figures of 7.4 billion and 3.5 billion respectively? To which I said, you weren't listening. I'm saying that the figures that are needed, the truthful figures, are 10 for AIB and 6.5 for Bank of Ireland. And time has shown that I'm right on AIB, certainly, and time will show that I'm right also that the figure I mentioned is right. It's not a matter of being right for the sake of being right. It's the matter of telling the truth and measuring it correctly.
But NAMA has effectively been a blank cheque for the banks rather than the people.
Well, no, it hasn't. It's required the banks to recapitalise at levels greater than they thought at the outset. But that was what was part of the cynical exercise. By introducing NAMA at a level of loan losses of 23 billion, it meant that AIB and Bank of Ireland would probably had a good chance of staying outside of state majority control. And that probably was what drove the experiment at that framework level. And that makes it doubly cynical and wrong. Because if they had admitted that the loan losses were going to be 40 billion, and as I've said, they're not actually 40. The losses are 66 billion.
Yeah.
And we have to face that, and we've got to ensure that bondholders, subordinated bondholders across the 5 banks, and senior bondholders will participate in recapitalising, addressing that figure of 66 billion.
Shouldn't they actually just have to take the consequences for their...
Of course they should. We should be bringing them in, as Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson did in the United States 2 years ago in October. Bring in all the participants in what will be the resolution of this banking crisis and reconstruction into one room, and with a lead task force, not negotiators, but presenters of the truth and presenters of the solution, because the solution is there within our hands.